And you're on the Brekkie Show here on westbremerradio.com.au, streaming live on the app and also on Amazon Alexa and Google smart home speakers. Nice to have your company this morning. Well, it's been a turmoil of a time for Andrew Giles, the Federal Immigration Minister, who has been in the headlines for weeks now about 150 people that were released from immigration detention thanks to a ruling by the High Court. But then, of course, we factor in this Minister's Direction 99. Now, to explain a little bit more about that, I'm very pleased to say we have the Springfield Senator, and that, of course, is the man who knows all. Paul Scar, how are you, mate? Good to talk.
Good to be with you, Damien. I don't know about knowing all. I try my best to keep informed.
Mate, this is quite an interesting conundrum when you look at it. I mean, because it's caused a bit of tension with New Zealand for years, and they're saying, well, we shouldn't have to look after Australia's criminals who grew up and committed crimes in Australia.
Well, that's what they're saying, Damien, but from our perspective, I'm firmly of the view if you're not an Australian citizen and you're given the privilege to live and work in our beautiful country, then with that come obligations.
Yes.
And if you break our laws, if you don't do the right thing by the local community, if you commit heinous crimes, then you should leave.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the fundamental roles of the government, is to keep Australians safe.
Yes, and we have laws in place like that require a non-citizen to have their visa torn up if they're convicted of a crime.
Exactly, and this is where the government has made an absolute meal of it, Damien. They, under pressure from New Zealand in particular, they changed the law. They forced the consideration of the length of time that a person has been in Australia to be considered as a primary consideration when a decision's made as to whether or not their visa should continue or not. And what that has meant is that there are now dozens of cases where, but for that change in the law by the Labor government, people would have been extradited. They would have left our shores and they've stayed unshore. And in some cases, they've committed further crimes.
Yes, yeah. And obviously that has an effect on the Australian population.
Absolutely it does. And it means we bear all the costs, the human cost of the victims of those crimes, but also the economic cost of having to deal with these people. And I come back to the original point. If you are not a citizen and you've been given the opportunity, which millions of people would give their right arm for, to live in our country, then at the very least you've got to comply with our laws.
This Direction 99, it's been running since early 2023 without much notice. It sort of, came in under the radar as such. But of course it blew up after one individual was charged with murder just weeks after his visa was reinstated, wasn't it?
That's correct. So that's when it's all come to light in the context of that tragic death by stabbing.
Yes.
And I think that's now shone a bright light on the situation. But the other point to note is it takes time for cases to work their way through the system. So it's only now that we're seeing dozens and dozens of cases coming through the system.
Under sustained pressure, the Prime Minister announced about a week ago that it would abandon Direction 99. Have we seen moves towards that?
No, we haven't. We haven't seen any concrete moves yet. And people need to bear in mind, in the Senate last week, I asked a number of questions in relation to this matter. And there's something like 100 additional cases currently going through the system which are applying the existing Direction 99 before it's being changed. So this is really time critical because there are dozens and dozens of these cases going through the system.
Yeah, and with more cases being questioned, it's more intent that we need to get this sorted.
Absolutely, yeah. Damien. And you know what we also need, Damien, and I'm sure I'd expect most of your listeners would agree to this. We need ministers to take responsibility.
Yes.
We need ministers to actually take responsibility when something goes wrong and they're the minister. Don't blame the officials in the department. Take personal responsibility. That's key to our system.
Yes. Well, the Prime Minister has said that they will abandon Direction 99. It's up to him and his government now to follow through and bring that to fruition. So there will be a lot of eyes on that, Paul.
Yep. Absolutely, and it can't come soon enough.
Yep. Mate, when we look at a few of the other issues closer to home for us and Ipswich job seekers, the Australian Bureau of Statistics Labour Force report shows that there's an extra 2,400 Ipswich residents who are unemployed since the election of the Labor government. Mate, that's not good figures.
No, it's not good figures. And these aren't just numbers, Damien. As we know, these are members of our community.
Yep.
Members of our community who are struggling to find work in the middle of a cost of living crisis. So these numbers are deeply concerning. As at March 2024, there were 13,500 Ipswich residents unemployed. That's 13,500. And also of concern is our level of youth unemployment.
Yes. In fact, our unemployment rate has risen from 5.4% to 6.5%, which is almost 2 full percentage points higher than Queensland's unemployment rate for the state.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So Ipswich's unemployment rate has risen from 5.4 to 6.4% over the last 12 months, and that compares to a statewide unemployment rate of 4.5%. And that youth unemployment rate is at 13.3%.
Wow.
Compared to the Queensland average of 9.3%. And that is deeply concerning because we know, your listeners know, that it is so important for young people to get on the right track at the start of their working career so they can build that confidence, build those skills and get established in the workforce.
Yep, yeah. And when you look at it, I mean, it's I guess there's a number of issues that are feeding into this, Paul, but one of them is, of course, the cost of living crisis. People aren't spending as much because obviously the RBA is wanting to bring inflation down, but then that has a knock-on effect to all of the small businesses who are struggling to pay bills.
Exactly, Damien. So small businesses are copping it from both sides. They're copping it from the increase in their costs, things like electricity prices going up, insurance costs, wage costs, etc. going up. And then on the other side, they're copping it because people are spending less.
Yes.
And if you've got to pay more for rent, if you've got to pay more for housing, if you've got to pay more for electricity, you've got less to spend in the small businesses around Ipswich. And that's certainly the feedback I've been getting.
Yeah. So what is the solution, do we think?
Well, I think the first goal has to be to bring down inflation.
Yes.
And there was a lot of criticism, not from politicians, but from economists, that the last budget didn't do that there was too much government spending in the wrong areas, and that will have the consequence of pushing up inflation. And in fact, the last inflation figure that was released in April indicated that inflation had in fact gone up. So I think the first thing you've got to do is get government spending under control and get inflation under control.
Yep.
And that then takes the pressure off businesses in terms of costs, means people have more money in their pocket to spend.
Yep. And when you look at it from a state-based point of view, I mean, you've got the Miles government going out there and splashing the cash like there's an election on the way. Oh, hang on, there is. So that's not going to help inflation, is it?
You know, Damien, I think the number one role of government is to do its very best to implement the right policies for the benefit of the people, regardless of when the date of an election is. And it really does disturb me, some of the things we're seeing from the state Labor government, that they're just being terribly reckless in how they're conducting themselves at the moment in the lead up to the next state election. But I think the people of Ipswich will see through that, to be frank.
Well, mate, time will tell, as they say in the classics. Paul, always good to catch up with you, mate. We need to do it a little bit more regularly. I enjoy our chat. So, have a great weekend, and we'll catch up soon.
Good on you. Thanks, Damien, and thanks to your listeners.